Right, hello, how you doing? Welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution, episode 26, which is Indoctrination, Indoctrination, Indoctrination. As per usual, the reason for that title will become apparent a bit later on. There was something that I wanted to allude to and demonstrate in the initial stages here, which that's now that I'm on my new home of Rumble. Some of you may remember that previously I'd done an episode about the Heritage Party, which then resulted in issues because they didn't, they wanted to have things around free speech and all that sort of stuff, but then they somehow didn't quite appreciate the inclusion of my little demonstration of my dark humour, where I essentially put together a little bit around the old Crocodile Dundee, the old that's not a knife, this is a knife. Well, because of some of the stuff that's been taking place around the coronavirus and that, and all of these vaccines that are not vaccines, I kind of thought, well, as soon as I've got the Japanese longsword, so that's one area of preparation that I've got. When it comes down to all of this drug experimentation and all this sort of stuff, I thought, well, okay, so these people, when they want to create this little zombie apocalypse and all this sort of stuff and that, messing with people's DNA. So seeing as they're obsessed with the films and that and trying to create this future that has got no bearing nothing to do with reality, I thought, well, okay, then in that case, then I need to have a self-defense that is also based on complete lack of reality, and hence this zombie apocalypse little scenario. And I thought, well, within those types of films, what kind of weapons of choice do people use to be able to combat against the zombies? So what I did was I made a little purchase this week, and when the little zombie apocalypse begins, I can now say that I am prepared. Got my little chainsaw. So that was a nice little purchase that turned up this week. And disclaimer for any morons out there, it's because I've got some trees in the garden that need to be cut down. But anyway, an unusual little side note just to get us going. For a change, why not? Might as well talk some bollocks on top of everything else. So anyway, as I did allude to last week, and that going back into the more serious stuff, such as it is, as I said last week, the investigation into the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department will end this week. I will come to the end of it, which means there's 4 offices that I'll be getting through. So, without further ado, let's get on with that part of it before I move into the second segment of solutions, which is where the indoctrination part will become apparent. So, here we go. So we start off with the Office of Manpower Economics. I mean, it initially, and that straight away, I mean, you're looking at what a stupid bloody name. I mean, years ago and that, I mean, the way that they like to change these titles of things and that, I mean, like human resources and whatever. It was just a poxy admin office, I can't be doing with just the name alone drives me up the bloody wall. So anyway, in terms of the key points of this one, they basically are looking towards the pay scales and try to justify that in a really, really piss poor fashion. But it goes across certain sectors of government where they're looking at the pay bands. So obviously, and that there's the graphics there and that you can kind of keep up with as well. I think you can probably figure out. Yeah. So you've got like the armed forces, doctors and dentists, the National Crime Agency, the National Health Service, police, prison service, senior salaries, and school teachers. So essentially, in that they're looking towards being the review body for all this sort of stuff and trying to justify themselves as to how much they get paid. So a couple of things I'm going to be keeping track on based on what they come out with here is, first and foremost, in that they give a specific number of people that they're then reviewing, which works out at 2.1 million. And then they've got an overall budget here of 91.6 billion. So that's something that, as I'm running through the process, I'll be able to check and make sure, similar to what I've been doing with the offices to date. And the reason why I know this department is already well over budget. But anyway. So the immediate problem that I want to kind of allude to again is that we have to remember how government puts together their annual budgets and how they present it. And if we go all the way back to, it was probably like episode 1 or 2, and where I'd shown what the budgets were for like something about a five-year period, and essentially for the period that we're in now, they were suggesting that the total budget was 92.7 billion. Well, we know that that's already not the full extent of the budget, and these particular salary bands and that, I mean, essentially in that there would be no, it would already doesn't add up. So again, this kind of brings back to this problem of how it is they do actually produce the reports and how they do present the budgets to Parliament and then through to, obviously, and that through to the general public. I think it is one of these areas and that where it has to be the entire budget that they're talking about, not just whatever they've suddenly decided to select, which, like I say, it doesn't bode well for your transparency and all this sort of stuff. So in terms of this particular department, again, we're also looking towards the issue that the only report that they've got, considering once more each one of these departments is supposed to be presenting their figures and everything on an annual basis, the only report that I've come across really for these people is a business plan which covers 2018 to 2020. So again, they're not reporting in the way that they should be. So with the department, this particular department itself, it also states in their particular budget that they generate income. Now, essentially what that means in terms of them saying that it's income is that these separate different organisations that I've already mentioned, these particular organisations, they essentially then charge them to perform this review. Well, that's, again, it's not really an income, is it? Because it's all taxpayers' expense. So again, that kind of feedback loop that they have, that kind of makes it look like they're doing something better than they actually are. It all ends up being a taxpayer expense, so they should stop that sort of nonsense. In terms of the process and how they actually do this kind of review, I mean, one word that does stand out to me is, as you can see, like they've got on there we go, on the far end graphic, where again they started implementing this stakeholder management kind of terminology, which is just, it just goes to show that this ideology is just creeping through everything. But the one thing that you do notice within that particular little set of circular activity as to what they consider as a relevant process, certain things that don't seem to appear within their remit of consideration, which absolutely should be, is the actual budget that they're supposed to be dealing with. So, you know, I mean, what is the taxpayer burden going to be in terms of these salaries? What's the affordability? And as much as they do have really quite bizarre ways of expressing themselves as per usual, and that in order to be able to sort of have some sort of weaselly way around things, just having something in it that says like bloody performance metrics. Stick to the basics rather than having to have all this fluffy nonsense that means absolutely bloody nothing. So if they were to do things in the kind of metrics that make sense to people, again, it would end up being much more transparent, and people would actually understand what their money's being spent on, rather than trying to make themselves look more intelligent than they actually are, and actually just looking more like they're just creating another swamp. So, I mean, in terms of this overall office, I don't really see the point in them, to be honest. I know that tends to be something that I say all the time with most of these offices, but I mean, I don't understand why, like the armed forces, the doctors, dentists, and, you know, the NHS and all this, why can't they figure these things out for themselves? They've got their own bloody admin departments and what have you. They've got their own reporting systems. I mean, surely they're better qualified to be able to understand what's going on. And then again, if they're fed the budget numbers, then they should be able to figure things out from there. And another issue I've got, when you look at the amount of money that they seem to be paying themselves, I'm not entirely sure that I'm convinced that the average salary that they seem to be getting, obviously, and that is going to be the lower and the higher end of that, but looking at it from an average, 57k, I don't see the value there. I don't see what they're doing as providing any real value. And so, in terms of who it is that they're working with and what it is that they're doing and the kind of process that they think that they're working around, it's just not, it's not worth it. It's really not worth it. So yeah, abolish that one. Right, this one, the proper full name for this is Office of the Regulator of the Community Interest Companies. Plus number, but yeah, we'll get to that. Right, so the first issue that I've got with this particular office is that despite them producing an annual report, there's not enough information within this annual report around the finances. There's also not enough in terms of the number of staff that sit within this office either. So that is also not up to scratch, and because the financials are not presented in a formal manner, that effectively means that this is also delinquent. So once again, another problem. And keep in mind that from the previous offices and that, about how they turn around and said across government everything's supposed to be transparent and correct reporting and all this sort of stuff. It's just not happening. Now, when it comes down to community interest companies, at the moment, from the report that's been produced, it says that there's 18,904 of these around the UK, and this particular office is set up to be able to enable them to be officially formed, essentially, in that. I mean, it is a very unusual way that people are doing things. So, as much as it's supposed to be like a not for profit and all this sort of stuff, and helping out in a range of different areas around the community, what they call the community, and that, but I mean that community can be quite widespread. But the one thing I have noticed with this is that it's once again it's another one of these it's another one of these footholds for ideologies in the similar way to like the NGOs and these bizarre little activist groups and things of this nature. There's too much wiggle room for that sort of organisation to get through into the system via the assistance that's provided by this office. So when you've got all these, essentially these vehicles that can be enabled to be a part of the official system and that, and then getting the kind of assistance that this office provides to them to go essentially in some ways and that around what Companies House does, it's not good. And from the report itself, as just kind of a one example, the types of organisations that are being set up within the report that's in the links in the description, there's one particular example which is a company called Ultimate Counselling, Training and Support Services, so UCTS. And apparently this is set up to address mental health in the BAME community living in London and the UK. So straight away what you've got is an ideologically driven racist organisation, and this sort of thing shouldn't be allowed or encouraged or indeed be formed in any way, shape or form. I mean, it's just having this notion of everything being wrapped up as community interest, and I mean, going back to the stakeholder management and that, all these little weaselly words to be able to sneak this ideology through and to give them some sort of credibility, it's not good. And each one of the companies, because from the ones that have been registered over the last year, and I did a check with several of them, and every single one of them is also registered within Companies House. So it goes through this particular office as a setup process, but then actually gets registered at Companies House anyway. So I can't see any other reason as to why they would not just have this handled at Companies House, other than having this ideological bent to be able to help ease through the sort of shit that frankly we shouldn't be allowing in this country, or any other country for that matter. So I suppose in some ways there is some sort of discussion required as around what the CICs are actually supposed to be, and more importantly where they're getting their money from, because I guarantee in quite a lot of these circumstances and that there's an awful lot of taxpayer money being fed through to these bastards as well. So I would look towards, first and foremost, having this, because obviously that when they're setting up each particular office and that, they still have the same fees to pay, which should just go straight through to the Companies House, rather than, yeah, this might be a plus 18k on the face of it, but it's just completely unnecessary to have these two offices acting separately in this way. And I would look towards, as a first step, going through every single registered CIC and doing a very much a root and branch, weeding out where the ideologues are, where the bullshit is, and like I say, with that one, where the racist organisations are. I don't give a damn about people turning around saying, "Oh well, certain communities, certain little divisions of communities should be able to look after it." Well, no, they shouldn't. Not like that. They shouldn't. No. I mean, if you've got something that is based around helping people with mental health, then you help people with mental health. You don't just turn around and say, "I'm only going to let black people through the door." I mean, it's fucking lunatic. So that sort of stuff will be gone. If you have, for example, something that is based on, I don't know, if you have like a church group or something along those lines, I mean, again, I don't really see that necessarily has to be registered as a community interest. This is something that you can do for the church. That would be something they could do via the church anyway. If you have something that is sort of nation-based, and this is where I can have a little bit of sympathy in that, because obviously having that spent quite a bit of time abroad, I know how you can sort of look towards your own kind effectively. There's not much point messing about with the terms, especially if it's somewhere and that where it's not your native tongue. So obviously that being out in Japan and that, once you've managed to learn the language and that, it's okay, you know, you're mixing with everybody else and that, and you're just getting on with life the same as everybody else does. But occasionally you just want to take that break and just sit back and relax, not have to think about the words that are coming out your mouth and speak in your native tongue. So even with organisation, even with the little groupings like that, I mean, it doesn't have to have this kind of official recognition. I don't see the purpose in that sort of thing. I mean, I do recognise that there are or can be benefits to community oriented organisations. I mean, I'm surprised that it would go up to that amount of money, to be honest. It doesn't really ring quite right to me, that, but I don't know. It's something that requires a bit more of consideration and discussion, because I think it could also be setting obligations to certain people in ways that they perhaps don't necessarily need to be adhering to. In terms of some of the people that actually work within these organisations, then there are going to be areas of consideration where you say, well, you know, if you got rid of 18,000 odd of these things and that, I mean, how many people would then lose their jobs? But surely if it's community interest, it's supposed to be, whatever happened to the volunteering? That's another part that I do struggle with a little bit, in so much as that it is something that I've known about and come across for a number of years now, and that where various people seem to think that in order for you to be able to have a well-run charity, it has to be run like a business. Well, the only thing that ends up happening then is that people end up giving to a charity, and the actual end cause gets very little of the bloody money, because everybody else is making sure that they're fed perfectly. I mean, some of these people get paid ridiculous amounts of money. So I don't know. It's. I would first and foremost, have it transferred to Companies House. You don't need this as an independent office. But in terms of the structure of these types of organisations, I'd need to look at that in terms of ensuring the relevance and, weeding out the ideology and the favouritism, and quite more often than not, misuse of either public funds or donated funds. So yeah, those areas would need to be looked at in more detail for this one. But as an office itself, I'd get rid of it. It's not necessary. Right, the Oil and Gas Authority. Right, I mean, the first part that jumped out at me with this one, I mean, apart from the zero, which we'll come to, but when I looked through the report that they've produced in terms of the cost to the taxpayer of maintaining this office, and then the number of staff within it, it works out that each individual, again, that scale, but I mean, there aren't that many people in this office, works out at 96,000. Nice work if you can get it, innit? Taking the piss much? That seems somewhat way off base. So I'm calling bullshit on that one straight away. I've also got an issue with their financial calendars, where they do show each and every year that, surprise, surprise, it works out as cost neutral. Just bullshit is the only thing that comes to mind, and that's probably why they ended up paying themselves 96 grand of that. I mean, it's, yeah, whatever we can get away with each year. But in addition to that, there's some stuff that, because this is supposed to be an oil and gas authority, and when you look at the income statement, I don't quite understand how this authority is managing to put together its income statement, because it's got a bunch of stuff in there around asset-related equipment, property, then depreciation, amortization. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I would expect to see from an operator, not an authority. So something again is not, it's not right here. Then, as you can imagine, you get once again the ideology, the idiocy and contradiction. It's always the default mode, and that when you've got ideology involved. But again, it's pushing this absolutely unproven bullshit narrative around this emissions nonsense. And they're talking about a focus to reduce the emissions by 2050, all this zero carbon crap, which is just fucking ridiculous anyway, as I've evidenced I don't know how many times now. And then they'll turn around and say at the same time that there's no conflict of interest here and that, because they're going to all look towards maximising the oil and gas sector at the same time as minimising it. Now, I mean, aside from just being stupid to full retard, I know there's going to be somebody out there that will turn around and say, oh, well, it's based on like carbon capture systems, and oh, you're bringing the new technologies and all this sort of stuff. But wish in one hand, shit in the other, and see which one fills fastest, as they say. It's just ludicrous. And then they've got the stuff in there about COP26 as well, and that's so, yep, you got your ideology going into there. But I mean, how you can have an authority that is, so like I mean, you got the priorities and that for 2019 to 2020, revitalise exploration. These are two completely competing opposite ends of the scale trains of thought, that we're going to reduce the emissions and look towards all of the fairy fart bloody ideology that doesn't bloody work, at the same time as doing more of what we already do. I mean, it's just, essentially, when it comes down to energy related organisations of any description, it does end up being, once again, one of these scenarios whereby the sectors as a whole need to be put together into one central pot, and to decide exactly what it is that we're going to be doing, and taking out all of this lunatic rubbish over things that make no bloody sense whatsoever. Just concentrate on being competent, concentrate on making sure that the nation has got the supply it's needed. And particularly after an announcement that I think happened either today or yesterday, where they're going to be putting up the prices of gas and electric by something like 9%. And they tried, Ofgem tried to sneak through saying, oh, it's because of the wholesale price. No, it ain't. No, it ain't. They've been found out immediately that they're lying. It's got nothing to do with the wholesale price, and it's all to do with subsidising the idiot ideology. We already have something like 2 million people in energy poverty in this country. We already had, up to 2017, I think, there's been struggles to get the data subsequent to that, but leading up to the report in 2017, you have something like about 32,000 people a year dying because of energy poverty in the UK. So, I mean, I have run through these sorts of figures previously, even, Europe-wide and around the world and what have you. So, I mean, I think the latest calculation that I did was over the past 15 years, it works out at something like 22.5 million people killed around the world because of either energy denial or energy poverty. And these pricks are going to be sticking up the prices by 9% to cause yet more poverty, all off the back of pipe dreams. All of this absolute idiocy has got to be taken out. And anybody that is promoting it, pushing it, indoctrinated into it, so go with the title, they need to be put to one side and just go, tap them on the head and that, and go, yeah, off you go, little boy. Shut up, go away. We can't be doing with this sort of nonsense. So this is another one that would be, taken down and put into the policy pot of, or rather into the RASIC stage, and that of developing this energy sector body to be able to get some empirical evidence and logic back into the system that doesn't lead towards killing your population. Absolutely ludicrous. Gone. Right, and on to the last one for BEIS, which is the Pubs Code Adjudicator. When I first come across this name, I thought, oh right, there's one that we can really have a go at because of all the crap to do with deliberately shutting all the pubs and everything. But it's even worse than I thought. So, as per usual again, no correct reporting. They haven't put out a report since 2018. What a shock. Then, according to the numbers, once again, you're looking towards the people involved. I mean, it's been bad enough in the ones that I've shown today, and that with the people getting the 57k that in a position that doesn't deserve it, then the 90 odd k in a position that doesn't deserve it. This one, 106k, 106,000 pounds as an average. I mean, get the fuck out of town. And once again, it's this, conveniently we're cost neutral. Are you really? Well, the money that they get comes from literally just 6 pub groups. This whole bloody office is based around, once again, these types of route to recourse solutions on six companies, which, oh, for Christ, so these 6 companies have to pay all that money into this pub adjudicator for them to get 106 grand out of it each. I mean, absolutely disgraceful. So when they call it an income levy, yeah, I bet they do. And essentially what we're dealing with here, and that is we're looking at something where these kind of pub systems and that, they go back a long way. And there have been some issues in the past in terms of the kinds of restrictions that they will put on the landlords that are then obliged to buy their beer and spirits and everything from them. So it is essentially, and it's essentially akin to like a franchise system. So I think the thing to do with this is that when we're looking towards wider business and regulations of business, then you look specifically into any clear problems that are specific to this sector, but then you just implement it within a wider regulatory solution, because I dare say there's an awful lot of stuff there that applies to the franchise systems across all sectors. So I don't see the point in just having this office just for 6 bloody companies. I mean, give me a break. It's bloody stupid. And you're just taking money away from a company, and that where they could spend that money far more efficiently than on a couple of morons that have got a code that they'll basically fiddle around with a little bit, I dare say, each year, and go, oh look, I've earned my salary. Yeah, I don't think so. So yeah, get rid of this one. And then the moment you do that, and in celebration, you make sure all the pubs are able to be wide open and do their thing, which they should be doing already. But anyway, that becomes a separate subject. And remember, if there's any zombies that are running around in the pubs and that, get yourself a little chainsaw. So, what that means is, this is the final complete picture of what all of the offices look like in BEIS. BS. Now, a reminder again that they said that the core ministerial office had an expenditure of 3.1 billion, and then they said that around 10.3 billion was made up from the offices, all of these offices underneath this particular ministerial department. So what they've actually got, instead of the 10.3 billion under these other departments, is 18 odd billion. So they are 7.7 billion over budget. So, well, it's not over budget though, is it? Because these are reported figures, and quite a few of them, that where they haven't reported correctly. These are the numbers that should have been picked up in audit, where they should be looking at this and saying, well, quite clearly your numbers do not match up. How has this got through the National Audit Office? How has this got through all of these think tanks that are supposed to be looking at this sort of stuff in detail and pulling it apart and saying, well, hang on a minute, you've overspent taxpayer money. Where's the accountability to the taxpayer? It's an overspend. So not only is the audit office wrong, but each one of the offices themselves are bad reporting, really awful. But the one, in addition to the waste of taxpayers' money, the amount of ideologically driven offices that are operating underneath this particular department is just staggering, and a true waste of the taxpayers' money. I mean, the levels of pseudoscience and just plain ideological bullshit. I mean, it does seem to demonstrate to me in that the extent of where all of this socialist retard, build back better bollocks, it demonstrates to me where an awful lot of this is actually coming from. And it is coming out of these types of programs, and like as I've mentioned previously, and that it's all going towards funding our own demise, and literally in a number of instances, like with the energy sector, literally killing people. It's staggering. So one of the areas that I have to remind myself of is that I did say at the beginning So like going right back to episode 1, that when I was going to be running through this process, I wanted to look at this from a perspective of understanding that an awful lot of this stuff means people's jobs, and it would be a case of ensuring that any jobs lost are done in a managed, staggered fashion, so that we don't just end up with creating mass unemployment to be able to reduce the size of government. Unfortunately, when it comes down to some of the nonsense that's being discovered here, I tend to think that one of the primary issues that might need to be taken into consideration is how many of these buggers would actually need to go to prison. Because there are quite a few of them that would be prime candidates for investigation and going to prison. And then there's another lot that, quite frankly, are so completely off their bloody heads that you wouldn't know where to put them, what to do with them. But you couldn't have them anywhere near anything that resembled anything to do with responsibility. They're completely off their bloody heads. Especially when we run through that. I mean, like I said, we go into the stuff and that's this government office for pseudoscience. All of the stuff under this the UK Research and Innovation. Oh, it's just sheer bloody lunacy. So I'm afraid it would end up being a scenario of going, well, unfortunately, I wasn't going to do too much against you and that until we were ready, but frankly, you know, when you've got people that are literally prepared to push forward ideology and see people die as a result of it, I'm not really going to have an awful lot of sympathy for those people. And because they've been stealing from the taxpayer for as long as they have, off you go. Go and, apart from what we're going to take back from you anyway, but yeah, go and see what it feels like to live in the kind of fashion that you want to be able to create for people. Let's see how well they get on. Let's put them in a situation where they have to live in their little Chaz chop. Let's see how long it is before they end up bloody starving. Outrageous. So yeah, I'm afraid I would have very little sympathy for an awful lot of these people. So I've done a little bit more shuffling around with the policies, so that I can actually fit the stuff in where it needs to, and then my ugly mug also doesn't go over the top of it all. So basically, when it comes down to the Office for Manpower Economics, that bloody awful name, the CIC, the Community Interest One, the Oil and Gas Authority, and the pub morons, all in the abolish section, which is, as you can see, getting bigger and bigger. So that's essentially where we would be, and then the cumulative taxpayer saving, and that's at the moment, and that is still hovering just above the 14 billion, well 14 billion, 43 million, so I mean, it's not that to sniff at, you know. So this is where we stand at the end of 3 ministerial departments. So for this part then, we move now into, I'm going to do a little bit around the solutions. I didn't want to just do those four departments and leave it at that. So as a bit of a reminder, so far I've mentioned around the principles, creating your databases for your network, and then using the what are called the SCS 5 degrees of separation, really. I mean the SCS 5 for short, but yeah, it's based on the 6 degrees of separation. That's how you can develop your network and try to do it in such a way that it doesn't appear, at least, to be such a big burden and so difficult. But in terms of what I want to go into on this occasion, I want to go to something that's just a bit more fundamental. And it may seem like something that is very much long term. And it is a long term proposition, but it is something that we do need to be looking at doing now. And it is something that can be started immediately, and it can, in the right circumstances, have some immediate effect. So what I want to be touching on this time is the indoctrination part of the issue, as per the title. So obviously this is about education, and this is a little bit of a UK centric thing, and you're gonna have to look at things in your own country to figure out the whens and the whys and the wherefores. So just in terms of a very brief look at where the real problems have come about. It was very much a case, though we can trace things back further than this, but in terms of a real ramp up of this indoctrination in the education sector, and that has permeated out into culture and everything else, as you'll see with the bit below. It really ramped up from 1997, from what I've managed to uncover here. And that basically means it comes under Tony Blair, because he did run on this campaign of education. That was the last thing from his mind. That's where the real problems started to come in. Now, we can have various arguments, opinions, and all the rest of it, and that's as to, is this a communist thing? Is that, that you've got the Gramsci, the march through the institutions, you got the other, any sort of other communist, and then the socialists, and then you got the Illuminati, and I don't care. I genuinely don't care in terms of this particular stage of things. And when you're looking towards having accountability on stuff later on, maybe. But the only part that seems to be relative for us to understand is how well this particular graphic at the bottom is laid out from a guy called Christopher Story. There's a link in the description to a book, his book, that discusses this, and that can be found. Then you can download the book from online for free, basically, and it's outlining these methods of demoralising and destabilising a nation. And so all the different techniques that they use, and it goes much further than what's on that particular part of the graphic. But this is the part that I want to concentrate on. So it doesn't matter about arguing the source of this for the time being. That's part of something that you can end up being educated on by yourselves later on. But it's just understanding what it is that we're looking towards undoing, that which has been put in place to cause the problems that we're faced with, and that we need to actually start pulling apart. And the education side of things is one of the most important. So a lot of this, that is kind of just like graphics as example. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be sitting here and that and going, right, now here's your lesson plan for this week. I'm not doing any of that crap. So essentially what you've got to be looking towards doing here, and that is taking back control of what education actually looks like. And as much as, like I say, I mean, a lot of the books that I've got as the graphics at the bottom of the screen there, and that they're looking towards like the higher end stage of school, like like your A level somewhere and that, before you go into higher learning. It's just purely for visual perspective. So the point is that you need to understand what it is that your kids are actually learning, what are they being fed at school, and it's your responsibility basically to make sure that they are learning the right things, and above all making sure that they're understanding the critical thinking that comes with the learning. So it's a matter of understanding what it is that you're actually being taught and where to question it, so that then you can actually understand the workings behind it on any level, on any subject. Because I mean, everyone's different, you know. I mean, it's always very easy to turn around and say, well, you know, here's the book on A-level mathematics. You know, I mean, there seems to be quite a lot of them these days, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be something that everybody wants to go to that at that level. That'd be good if you did, and it's becoming even more important these days. But you look towards what it is that you can actually do yourself. Check the books yourselves, buy the books yourselves, look at the books yourselves, and make sure that you know what's actually the stuff that the kids need to be taught, and what is the junk that they've tried to shove through into it. So it might end up being a case of, again, if you've got networks of people, that's all. Which are the best books to learn from? Which are the best books that are giving the kids the core tools that they need? And making sure that if the schools are not doing it correctly, you've got to take responsibility and do it yourself. So I mean, when it comes down to textbooks and things of this nature, if you're managing to get on a scenario in that where you've got potentially a group of people, you might only need to just have one. You've all agree on one textbook and that, and then you just use that to be able to print the copies from. Save yourself a bit of money, maybe. Depends how much you're costing to get your prints out, of course, but just look towards those shared resources so that everybody understands what the best methods are for you, and then make sure whatever you do in that is that whether you're going to be looking towards some sort of homeschooling, or whether you are looking towards being in a situation where it's just not practical for you and you're having to follow up in the evenings, just set yourself out a proper schedule so you know exactly what stage your kids should be at, or you'll understand from dealing with your own kids as to whether they're struggling in any particular areas. I mean, the one part that an awful lot of people don't seem to understand in most of the Western nations, by pretty much across the board, when they look at the Asian kids, so I'm talking specifically now about the likes of the experience that I've had out in Japan, and then countries like China and places like that as well, Korea. The kids over there, they go to school, and then in the evening they go to another school. Basically, it's a private school that they can be there for anything up to like 9-10 o'clock at night, and it may seem, and it probably is a little bit over the top in terms of how much the kids are getting pushed. But the basic principle that I'm trying to get across is that it depends on the speed of learning of the kid, the abilities of the kid, the time that you can spend with the kid. So, I mean, if you can do things from a home learning basis and that, then you're going to be much more on top of it. But if you have to do something just a couple of hours in the evening, you know, I mean, you might sit there and say, well, you know, I'll come home from work, I want to sit down, I want to relax and watch a bit of TV or whatever. Well, tough shit. If you want to do things like that, don't have fucking kids. Take the responsibility for your kids. And apart from anything else, the one thing I will point out, because I have come across this situation myself, when you're actually running through an awful lot of this stuff, like, you might think that you're the cleverest bastard out there, but when you go through some of these books, the amount of stuff that you've forgotten, or you know, you can't bloody remember. I didn't do that at school. All this sort of nonsense. So you're actually learning stuff yourself, and if the kids can see that you're learning at the same time as them, then it's like, okay, we've got a level playing field here, and that I can work with that. You're not sitting there and necessarily dictating to them. You will come across it at some point, I guarantee it. Obviously not for the nippers or anything like that. But the thing about it isn't that it's then it's feeding your mind as well. I mean, one of the worst things that people can come across is becoming stagnant. So even when it comes down to stuff like with this the Sisyphus complex solution itself, if you would turn around and say, well, there's certain areas that I've got interest in and I need to be able to learn more about it before I can put any input. Well, do it. You know, not everything has to be done on a formal basis, but just make sure you're getting the information from the right places. Search around if need be. Know, well, and you'll certainly come to understand as you're going forward. Because if you've got your own measure of critical thinking, you'll soon find out who the propaganda merchants are and who not to trust. So, in terms of the kids, it is possible these days as well now to have a private tutor that you don't have to have literally coming around every single day and costing you a fortune or anything like that. It can literally be sort of like a support service, an hour a week or something like that, depending on the subject. And you know, there's a whole range of different things that you can do, and there's a whole range of resources out there. Lots of stuff. It depends on your budget, it depends on your timescales, but that's why you set out your schedule, your study schedule plan for your time and the kids' time, and where it is that they want to be on the scale of education. In terms of things like exams, now it is possible for you to be able to book exams yourself and have the kids turn up. But again, you're going to have to pay attention to what those exams include, because if you're ending up with a scenario where the exams are including some sort of, like within mathematics and that, suddenly it's got something completely irrelevant crap that says 2 + 2 is racist and therefore it's 5. Quite frankly, that's not an exam that you want to be taking. Anything that wants to include all of this critical racist theory, all that sort of nonsense that they're trying to sneak in, avoid it like the plague. So if anybody has any sort of concerns around those types of exams for your kids and all this sort of stuff, the one thing that I would, and I know it can be difficult for people to understand this to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, when you've got a certificate that says, oh, you know, I've got this particular qualification, it's a piece of paper. I know it's a piece of evidence, but it's still a piece of paper. What you can do in terms of having some evidence is that as you're learning things, as you're going along, try to have it done with some practical experience and creating something using the knowledge that you've gained. There are situations where you might be able to have some kind of work-based or project-based initiative that you can do from home perfectly right, and just basically develop a portfolio of what it is that you've actually been learning, so you can essentially go into whatever particular organisation that the kid wants to have interest in, and you can say, right, here's the work that I've done. This is prime example of what it is that I can actually do, what it is that I'm offering. There are obviously certain professions where that isn't going to cut the mustard. Yeah, you have to work according to what can actually be achieved. So if you do want to be a doctor or anything like that, obviously that you're going to have to go in through the university system, all that sort of stuff. You're just going to have to make sure that the kid understands what's the bullshit, what isn't the bullshit. Make sure that they understand where that wall needs to go. But the thing about it is that the more people do this sort of thing, the less the schools are going to be able to get away with pushing it. They'll try, and I'm sure they'll try to hang on with both hands and dragging their nails. But if everybody's turning around and just sitting in a classroom and going, that's bollocks, and the reason why that's bollocks is X, Y, Z, what are they going to do? They're going to say, oh right, we're going to mark you all down. All right, fuck you. Walk out. Walk out, go somewhere else. Find some sort of an exam system and that isn't an indoctrinated exam. There's always these solutions out there. And when it comes down to things like a profession of, if you need to have a medical profession or anything like that, find the place that is guaranteeing you that they're concentrating on actual empirical factual evidence, not ideology. You can find these places. It can take time, a bit of research and all the rest of it, but you know, it's responsibility again. So on the other end of the scale, I mean stuff that is more like business oriented or IT oriented and what have you, you can walk through the door and that with that portfolio, which is going to be far more impressive, especially if you manage to do a few projects on the side. And you can turn around and say, well, okay, here's what I can do, but also to really demonstrate what I can do, give me a week. Let me come and work here for a week and demonstrate what it is that I can do. It won't work out every single time. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but you can have your kids get the foot in the door by offering up their time. I mean, how much joy would they have in that if they've spent a week on their time and their money offering up what the services that they can provide, and at the end of that period they've got themselves a solid position. It'd be worth that week, and they will have demonstrated to the employer the level of commitment that they will show. So there's all manner of different ways that things can be done. So in terms of in terms of the adults, I mean the one thing that we do have to face up to here, and I've had a few arguments over this thing over the last couple of weeks really, where I am pointing out to an awful lot of people of my generation and 2 generations above, whose fault that we're in this bloody mess. It ain't the youngsters, it is the likes of us, and we need to be owning up to that. And if that means that we end up having to spend more of our day making up for it, then just fucking get on with it and do it. So there could be situations where, you know, I mean, the more that you're starting to learn, the more that you're starting to help with your own kids and working with your network and learning more yourself and making sure that you're not going to be sucked into any of this indoctrination crap and this socialist ideological bullshit, and trying to find what actually is a real solution, where the problems are, what the solutions are. The more useful you become, you could end up in a scenario where, well, a couple of things really. I mean, you could get the confidence to say, well, okay, within the stuff that I've learnt as a result of making this commitment, I can now put that forward as a proposition where you may even start your own company based on it. You might even be able to offer, within reason, you know, I mean, you can't take the piss too much in that when it comes down to this sort of stuff, but in terms of being able to teach other kids, you might have found that your ability to be able to teach is far beyond what you expected. You might find that you've got a renewed interest in so many of the different subjects, and particularly again in that, I mean, for the kids that are older and that, when you say, for example, that the unlikely scenario, but if you was teaching kids or working together with them and that, and working with them On advanced mathematics, there's a whole range of equations that have yet to be solved. And it's no coincidence that some of the people that have actually solved some of the big equations in the past have not come from the academic sector. It's worth bearing in mind. There are things that the plebs are actually very good at. And I think an awful lot of them upstairs need to bloody remember that. Because they are thick as shit. So, you're then also going to end up with this one other situation, which will be instilled in your kids, and it will help with you as well. Is that whatever kind of situation that you find yourself in, the more informed you become, the more confident that you're going to be. So when it comes down to being able to explain yourself, you're going to be certainly clearer than I am most of the time. You're going to be more efficient in how you explain yourself. It's going to be methodical, easy to understand. You'll be able to make your case if you're presented with an argument of some description. If you are presented with some ideological bullshit, you'll be in that situation where you can have the confidence to just sort of sit there and go, yeah, all right, mate, and then just go and walk in the opposite direction and go, yeah, look, you're wasting your time with that one, or argue the fact, one or the other. It's getting that responsibility, and it's getting that level of achievement for yourself, for your family, for everybody else around you. And it is getting rid of this lunatic asylum that is being created by a very, very few. Because there are so few people that are pushing this on so many. And it's about time that people stood up and understood the fundamentals. Like I say, when it comes down to solutions, it's not always about, I'm going to do this now and I'm expecting a result next week. I mean, it's a little thing, and that for anybody that's got proper nippers. This was something that I've done with one of my own. When a little kid is, say, around about anywhere between like 6 to 9 months old, so proper little nipper. In terms of being able to get your kid to be able to read and write before they're 2 years old, what you do is you get, I mean, obviously that you'll have your computer and that, so don't let your babby smack your computer around. nothing quite that desperate, but you can put some pictures up to sort of get their interest in that, like pictures of animals and things of that nature. And then you can start saying, oh, you know, there's a cat, there's a dog, all this sort of stuff. But then from them, get your alphabet and get your numbers. But with your alphabet, get your picture on one side of a card, and then the actual letter on the other end, on the other side. And then you can start to play like little snap games or anything like that. But the other thing that you do with it is when you lay them out on the floor and you have them the wrong way round. You know, so you've got the letter facing up, and you go, where's the dog? And they have to find they have to recognise where's the letter D, turn it over, and they got the picture of the dog, and they got it right. Little games like that you can start from very, very early on, and those kids actually do really enjoy it. And without them realising it, you're essentially teaching them the alphabet. And you can do something similar with the numbers. You know, how many of something there are. It's up to you how far you want to go with the numbers. And that, I mean, generally speaking, that you don't want to go much more than 20. But at least initially. But you can start to get them to do things like that, and then what you can do, and what I've found, and that it worked out from roughly around about 1.5 years old, you can then sit them in front of the computer and you can say, all right, can you see the letters on the keyboard? And then you don't let them play it like it's a piano. You're right, press that particular one, and then you can start to teach them how to spell. All these little things that you can actually do. I mean, you could try to get them to teach to write as well. The computer side of things, and that it's for that age, that tends to be a very simple thing that they can deal with quite simply. To one side, then you can turn around that and show, right, this is how you actually draw the letters, all this sort of stuff and that. So I mean, by the time they get to school age, they're walking through the door, reading and writing, and understanding the numbers before they've even got started. And that all have been taught through a game. So they're getting into the process of wanting to show what they've learned and what they can do, and they'll take more interest in being able to advance further. So just little things like that. There's various other ideas and solutions and things like that. I mean, have a look around yourself and that to see what works out for you. Obviously, not all kids are geniuses. You try to work to the level that you think that they can achieve, but don't go easy on them, but then don't go bloody mental on them either. You don't have to, what they call the tiger mums and whatever, you don't have to go quite too far. But just be sensible about it. You're the one that's going to have to be responsible. The responsibility will give you your sense of achievement as well, and things will work out better that way. So, like I say, as much as it's potentially very much long term, for you yourself, you might find that you want to look at something that you're interested in. You might not have kids, or your kid, like with me and that, I mean, mine are old enough than that to be able to look after themselves. Plus they're over the other side of the world now. But anyway, which gives me a lot of free time to do this shit. But anyway, figure out the areas that you want to get interest in. Figure out, because of the lunacy that's being rammed down everybody's throat these days, it is possible. I mean, as I demonstrated through that coronavirus video, and also through the one that I've done over the climate stuff, if you actually look into these things, it's not difficult to be able to know what the facts are. So when you end up with these idiots that turn around, oh, you're not a scientist, and you're, well, who cares? If you can actually read the papers and you understand what the processes are, that's what you're looking to know. You're narrowing it down to what the critical questions are. Who has resolved these critical questions? What's the missing pieces? Who's talking bullshit because they've missed out on this, this, and this? It's not that difficult to do if you put your mind to it. So that's the important part of education, and that's why education has to be part of the solution. So I wanted to get that one in at this stage because it is an immediate thing. It is something that everybody has to do. So yeah, there you go. There's my solution for this week. So next week, what I will be doing is I'll be running a bit of an overview as to what the Sisyphus complex solution process looks like at the moment, after having completed those 3 ministerial offices, so that we'll know, or rather so you'll understand, what the government map now looks like, what the government map could look like in those 3 departments once we've reduced things down, what the layout is, as much as I try to put it up on screen that you can't really see it too well, but what that looks like in a proper plane view, what the RASIC looks like, what the lessons learned looks like, what all the different stages look like, what are the other levels of data that are required there as part of support for the information that you're looking to be able to create the overall perspective. So I'll run through that bit to give you a bit of an idea as to what it is that I'm doing and how it is that I do it. So there's no state secrets here. I might start to just touch on maybe the next department, which is going to be the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, which has got 45 core offices that I'll be investigating. Whether I end up with a similar situation and end up having to have a few other spin-offs, that's what we'll discover as we go through it. So that's basically what you can look forward to next week. God dear. Right, so I think that'll do it. I've probably gone on for quite a while. So as per usual, anybody wants to say anything, anybody wants to contribute anything, anybody wants to have a chat about these things, feel free to get in touch. The contact details are always in the description. Have a think about even offering up some solutions that you think are relevant, that are practical, achievable, fundamental, and lead towards being able to implement and complement what it is that I want to be able to try to achieve here as an overall model. Nothing is perfect. Never expect anybody to come up with anything perfect. Certainly don't expect everything that I say to be perfect. That's life. That's the whole point. That's proper progress. It's not progressive, it's progress. Progressive means regressive, never forget that. So yeah, I think that'll do it. Obviously I'll close out on the Moirai directory, and again, open offer. Anybody that wants to have anything up there, just let me know. And that'll do it, I think. Right, so I shall see you next week with episode 27. Right, cheers, bye.